Ismaila is coming home. 5 years ago, he was sent away to an Islamic school, but ran away. Now we're taking him back to be... We've driven for about 3/4 of an hour out to one of the big, sprawling suburbs of Dakar. We've been with Ismaila. We're waiting here now because we've rung his father, and he's about to come down here. So he's going to see Ismaila for the first time since he was 4 years old. We wait. Ismaila waits. The minutes pass. It's agonizing for him. And then at last his father arrives, but he's far from happy to see us or his son. He does allow us to follow them to the family home. But Ismaila is treated like an unwanted guest. Now his mother arrives. After 5 years, this is how she greets him. The men discuss his future. They're clearly embarrassed that he's here and ashamed about the treatment he suffered in the Dara. Finally, they leave the room. And the atmosphere is transformed. The women of the family crowd round. They laugh and hug him. They say he was sent away by his father and uncle because they wanted him to have a traditional education. His mother was threatened with divorce if she tried to get Ismaila back. One by one, he meets his relatives again. These are 2 of his brothers. Bit by bit, he starts to relax, and slowly he begins to be accepted back into the family. It's been an extraordinary afternoon. We expected an emotional reunion, but when we got here, almost no one in the house, there's about 15 people in the house, would even look at him. They all sat down. His mother wouldn't touch him. His father actually left the room. And it turned out, once we asked more questions, that his father and uncle had been the ones who'd sent him to the Dara and refused to let his mother take him out. Now, the moment the men left the house, the women began to hug him, they began to play with him, they started to smile and said they were relieved and very, very happy to have him home.
Often when the child is given to a relative or someone else that the parents are quite close to, there is a fear of losing face if the child is brought back without having achieved the mastery of the Quran. And so sometimes in those cases you'll see parents who are upset that the child has run away or upset that the child has not completed his studies.
We try to talk to Ismaila's former teachers, but when we find the Dara, they make it clear they don't want to be interviewed. They become hostile and we have to leave. It's thought there are now more than 50,000 Talibé across the country forced to beg by their teachers. Unable to go home and abused in the Daras, some run away and seek help from the authorities. And come here to the Centre Guindi in Dakar. It gives them shelter and food, education and medical treatment. They also at last get the chance to play. We can't identify them for fear of reprisals from the teachers or Marabout. We talk to 2 brothers. Their teacher was sent to prison for beating them. Why would a teacher forbid you to play football?
Because he didn't want them out playing. It was okay begging but not playing.
What would happen if you didn't bring back enough food to the Dara?
They were beaten.
Were you beaten often? Their injuries are barely a month old. For one, it's just too upsetting to continue. Maybe we should, Tony, I think we should stop. I'm sorry. Yeah. 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 I think we stop. Yeah?
The government has started to look at regulation of Quranic schools, but the government needs to make sure that not only does regulation include curriculum and the types of studies going on, but that there are norms and standards that guarantee the protection of children in these daras.
We asked to speak to the Ministry of Education, but they instead directed us here, to this office. This is the Ministry of the Family, of Empowerment of Women and of Microfinance. It's a somewhat shabby office in a slightly run-down area of the city and possibly gives you an indication of the level of priority placed on trying to reform the daras by the government.
La pauvreté est une des causes principales.
Poverty is one of the main causes of families abandoning their children, but it's no justification for abandoning them, which is why we carry out education campaigns to tell families to take responsibility. But at the same time, we're developing programs to tackle the poverty of those families.
De lutte contre la pauvreté de ces familles.
The present crisis didn't begin in the cities, but in rural Senegal, where most of the population used to live. An ancient way of life destroyed by crop failure and mass migration to urban areas. Daras do have a long and proud history. For centuries they offered children in the countryside an Islamic education for free. In return, parents and local people offered the dara food. Pupils weren't forced to beg. That tradition survives to this day in many rural areas, and in the cities you can still find examples of good daras. Here they learn the Quran, of course, but they're also taught a wide variety of other subjects.
Girls have their own room, which they don't share with any boy.
They have proper dormitories, washing is done for them, and they get 3 meals a day. It's run by a charitable organisation which has schools all over Dakar. The pupils come from across the country. One has even been sent from the US. All this is provided for free, and no one is sent onto the streets to ask for food or money. What do you feel about the Marabout who exploit children?
Wallahi, I'm sorry to say this, but if I was the responsibility of this country, I will catch them and jail them, because this is spoiling the picture of Islam.
What does this say about Senegal today? Well, it shows that the people are naturally generous. There's a strong belief in zakat, the Islamic principle of charity, but it's been corrupted by poverty and mass migration, and the government seems overwhelmed by the scale of the problem. It plans to build new daras, start religious education in state schools and crack down on the Marabout, but for some that's still not enough.
We don't understand this kind of indifference of the government. We have now all provisions law to make a real repression of this kind of exploitation. But there is no implementation of this text. And time is up to make a real implementation and to get a clear political will to stop this kind of crime.
On peut connaître une loi et être hors la loi.
You can know a law and still be outside it. The car driver knows he shouldn't run a red light, but still sometimes he runs the light. The poverty of the families and the Marabout means that often they can't respect the law. We're placing the emphasis on education campaigns. Before you can apply the law, people must be told about it. And then you can say to everyone, look, the laws exist.
Attention, les lois sont là.
But there are other ways to tackle the problem. Here, 100 talibé have been brought together by a local charity to show them a world beyond the dara. Long-term success, though, will only come if the government can break the link between poverty, faith and exploitation. For now, at least, these boys are learning how to play, not being taught how to beg. But what happened to Ismaila? The boy returned home after 5 years in Adara. At first it looked like he might be punished for running away from the school. We've stayed in touch and been back to see him. It's clear he's been accepted by his family, and a charity now pays for him to go to a local day school. So Ismaila is safe, and there's one less Talibé forced to beg on the streets of Senegal.
Sometimes you need more than a headlight.
It does allow us to follow them to the family home. But Ismaila is treated like an unwanted guest. Now his mother arrives. After 5 years, this is how she greets him. And then at last his father arrives, but he's far from happy to see us or his son. Ismaila is coming home. 5 years ago, he was sent away to an Islamic... Going to see Ismaila for the first time since he was 4 years old. We wait. Ismaila waits. The minutes pass. It's agonizing for him. School, but ran away. Now we're taking him back to be... We've driven for about 3/4 of an hour out to one of the big sprawling suburbs of Dakar, and we've been with Ismaila. We're waiting here now because we've rung his father and he's about to come down here. So he's